Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. China's Ministry of Water Resources on Sunday raised the emergency response for flood control to level 2, the second highest in response in the system. And as heavy downpours continue to lash vast stretches of the country. Since July the 4th, floods have been observed in 212 rivers nationwide, among which 19 topped the previous water level records. The country's largest freshwater lake, Poyang Lake, has reached a record high, with thousands of soldiers dispatched to shore up its banks. China's worst floods in recent years were in 1998, when more than 4,000 people lost their lives and nearly 3 million displaced. How will China battle these natural disasters? How will the long-term changes in climate patterns make the country more vulnerable? And what can be done about them? Let's invite our panelists. For more on the latest natural disaster floods in China, we are joined in Beijing by Ma Jun, Director of the Institute of Public and Environment Affairs. Also in Beijing, Professor Xue Lan, Dean of the Schwarzman College at Tsinghua University, a well-known public policy expert from this country. Meanwhile, joining us in Wuhan, the epicenter, not just about COVID-19, but this time the floods as well, Xu Beibei, Associate Professor at Huazhong Agricultural University. Mr. Xu, let me begin by asking about the latest situation from you in Wuhan.
Everybody in Wuhan is pretty safe, and we have experienced several rounds of flooding in recent years. Wuhan residents are more concerned about waterlogging in the city. Especially we have like a heavy series of rains starting from early June, and it has been a month and more for this round of rains. And actually, we have a lot of, water like amassed to certain levels, and people cannot, or it's a little bit hard for people to go outside.
The people in Wuhan have already been working very hard in order to deal with COVID-19. But now there's another natural disaster. So how are people holding up to it?
We have our confidence in the government and in ourselves. And we also have confidence in the riverside dams along the Yangtze River. And so I think people still spend their normal lives.
Yeah.
We get the news from televisions, and we also get news from our mobile phones. And they announced, for example, several rounds of warnings, and then give advice to people not to go to the riverside parks and just stay away from the waterlogged places.
I see.
And also we get rainfall news regarding rainfalls from the weather stations. So sometimes there's kind of like a thunderstorm warning. There's kind of heavy rain warnings, and we get them constantly.
Xu Beibei, for us in Wuhan, thank you so much. All the best to you. Be safe. And now let's bring in our panelists to discuss the latest situation. Mr. Ma Jun, Professor Xue Lan, confidence is one thing, but natural disaster, Professor Xue, as they say, either fire or water, it is not something that human can control. Professor.
I think in terms of general strategy in coping with this kind of disasters, one is to mitigate the risks of the problem. But here, I think the first order of the disaster, there's no way you can control. For example, the big rain and big rainfall, and so on. But at the same time, you do have the possibility of mitigate the risks of the second order of risks. For example, in 1998, when there was a big flood in Yangtze River, I think there was a national effort in trying to preserve the natural environment of along the Yangtze River. So that actually allows the natural environment, the mountains and so on, they can hold more rainwater, so that will not generate so whether when you have a big rainfall, that will not lead to big flood. So that's the one, you can mitigate the second order of the risk. So that's one strategy that, but of course that takes a long time to mitigate those risks. The second thing is to adapt to the, to the problem. Mm-hmm. That, in a way that, human society have accumulated a lot of experience and adapt to the situation. I think in Wuhan, as already been said, that, rain log used to be a problem, yeah. But now I think that with a better drainage system that would allow that problem, to reduce its damage to the city. Yeah. So I think those strategies are the ways that we deal with.
And Mr. Ma, as an environmentalist, how do you see the latest floods and compare 1998 particularly?
The difference is that, in 1998, the whole watershed of the Yangtze River Valley suffers from torrential flooding with record rainfall across the whole watershed. But this year, it was more intensively occurred in the area, in the middle ridge and lower ridge of the Yangtze River. Mm. Fortunately, upper ridge hasn't suffered from record flooding. So I remember when I wrote the book China's Water Crisis. Yeah. That was 1998, and at that time, eight peaks occurred in Wuhan, and with a record one over, several of them are over 60,000 cubic meters per second. And this year, at this moment, it's only half of that. We did see more rainfall, heavy rainfalls happened in a more intensive way. This is not just a short-term one-off phenomena. It was a trend following the many speculate this to have something to do with climate change.
What do you think are some of the most important points we can learn through history, and also comparing notes with the others who have also been suffering over the past few decades?
In the long run, we can reduce, at least the slow down the pace of climate change, so that actually those extreme weather can be, less. Mm. In the midterm, since 1998, China has learned a lot of lessons about ecological system, how we actually can preserve the ecological system, so that actually, whenever you have those kind of extreme weather, the secondary kind of a crisis will be less, and the damage will be less. But in the short term, is how do we have a better sort of emergency management system to respond to the to the crisis, right. To rescue people from those dangerous areas, provide some essential needs to them. I think that's what I think China has been doing in the recent years.
Mr. Mao, tell me more about from the very beginning, how should we build in this emergency issue, and also the mindset of emergency into the overall designing and building of the cities?
When we build all this project in our planning phases, we need to integrate all this flood and disaster relief functions. And so the drainage system, as Professor Xielan pointed out, is extremely important. But equally important, we need to keep in mind that China is also suffering from water shortage. So it's not just enough to drain and discharge all the flood water downstream. It's also important to make sure that we maintain the natural capacity to absorb the excessive water, to keep all the wetland and low-lying places not to be fully occupied, for residential and for industrialization. It's important. The so-called sponge cities have been a concept that increasingly got support from the not just the experts but the people. Because we need to make sure that we have the natural trees and plants and and green land to absorb all this water. We need to make sure that all the paved up area, it's not just cement, it's permeable, and they are permeable so that the water can be stored, and this is extremely helpful, especially to tackle the water logging problem. Right. And talking about infrastructure, I think it's not just equally important. It's about the software. I think one major development is the IT technology in comparison with 1998. This year, we can have more than 50,000 monitoring stations on our rivers to share their information at real time. So tap into big data, Internet of Things, and AI. This can help us to better do the flood forecast and give early warning. And also, as Beibei showed, demonstrated that all this cell phone system, or a smartphone can be used to transmit all this early warning. Because now, we talked about heavy rainfalls happened in a more intensive way. Yeah. And more unexpectedly, so we need those early warning systems.
Right. Finally, before we go, a question for both of you. We've already seen this year, 2020, quite a challenging year with COVID-19. Now, that is not resolved yet. However, we have another layer of crisis regarding natural disasters, such as flooding, such as earthquake. We also see in Beijing and Tangshan recently. So how are we fighting on various front lines? What is the best way? Professor Xue, briefly from you, and then Mr. Ma.
Recognize these are the reality we have to face, but at the same time, we also find the best way to join in the effort in fighting with this. I think that's sort of the way that we can go forward.
Yeah, this year, obviously, nature forces us to be more kind of multi-task style, and I think, as Professor Xue had pointed out, China set up the emergency response ministry to try to integrate all these functions from different ministries. That's for the long term is very important. But this year, we still have to see all the, from the top leaders to the provincial city leaders have to go to the front line, give instructions. So it means that our whole emergency response system have not been fully matured. Before that, I think we gonna, sometimes still find it quite hectic, and I think we need to tap into the, we talk about big data and new technologies to try to better not just control all the flooding, but also try to manage that in a way, as a resources.